Playwright Jonathan Spector, welcome to Cultural Attache.
And thank you so much for having me.
So, Eureka Day, has been pretty good to you this year. What with a Tony Award for Best Revival of a Play, and now Pasadena Playhouse is one of about a dozen theater companies that is going to be putting on the production. And it's also currently running at the Marin Theater in Mill Valley. So you must feel pretty good about all the success Eureka Day has brought so far.
Yeah, it's been, it's an incredible gift as a playwright to get. I mean, to get any play produced at all is tough as a writer. So to have a play get to have this much life is really special.
To what extent do you credit the play's popularity, or on what level do you credit the play's popularity, given that consensus, as the play itself depicts, is damn near impossible to achieve?
Sorry, can you say it
Yeah,
again?
I mean, with so many
Oh,
productions going on, you know, to what do you credit the play's popularity, given that consensus, as the play depicts
hmm.
itself, is damn near impossible?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I think to a certain degree, any play that has kind of a very high profile, well-received New York run tends to have a lot of life after that. And obviously there's a certain kind of I don't know, obvious relevance in certainly with I mean, in a way I could never and have anticipated, and is certainly rather horrifying with the sort of dismantling of the CDC and the FDA and the government actively taking away vaccines from us. It's sort of a very particular moment in terms of some of the ideas the play is wrestling with. Um, yeah, and I think I think part of all of the production this year is it's also been the play has been around for a bit. It had kind of a long journey to Broadway, so I think there were a bunch of regional theaters that had been wanting to do the play for a while, but the rights hadn't been available. So yeah, sort of all of those things coming together.
Well, you certainly couldn't have predicted what would happen 7 years later, to the play. But for all of these fall productions happening as this administration, as you mentioned, is dismantling any sense of trust that we could have in the government as it relates to our own health. I mean, you couldn't, I guess, on a certain level, you couldn't have asked for better news cycle to follow your
Yeah,
play.
I don't know. I don't know that I would ever, it's like the monkey's paw of wishes, I guess, for your play to have a certain kind of relevance, but would never want that relevance to be, at the cost of so many people being sick and dying. So that's not something I would want. But I also think there's a way in which, the play both speaks to sort of what's happening, but also from a very different angle because it was written before COVID. And, prior to COVID, it's hard to remember now, but that vaccines were not particularly politicized in a partisan sense. Like there were like if the only fact you knew about somebody was that they didn't vaccinate their kids, that didn't necessarily tell you about the rest of their politics back then. In a way that now it has become much more correlated, to sort of being a Republican or a Democrat, as you see the sort of rising rates of unvaccinated children in red states. It was sort of all been, got scrambled by Trump and COVID. So in a way, the play was initially about something very different, which is about um, a place where you could have people who all basically held the same worldview and the same values and the same beliefs, except for this one thing where they kind of lived in separate realities from each other. I think that's kind of less true now as we've become increasingly, siloed in every aspect.
Right. You did a fascinating interview for American Theater with Anna D. Shapiro,
Mhm.
and you put a lot of the blame for how the characters in your play possibly behaved at social media and the internet, because of how much it entrenches certain opinions in one group of people versus what it does for other people. and that it doesn't allow for opposing views. What role do
Hmm.
you see as not listening as having an impact in how we make our way through life?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's, one always wants to be cautious about, you know, the idea that things were so much better in the past. And yet it's hard to escape the feeling that things were much better in the past, before we had, this kind of phenomena of social media that not just makes us each in our own bubbles, which I think we sort of know, but also on a way that is hard to um, hold on to, even if you understand it intellectually, really distorts your sense of how widely held, opinions that you have are. It makes you think that many more people think just like you than actually do, and that the people who disagree with you are kind of a much smaller and more extreme minority. So I think it makes it much harder to um, I don't know, be able to have conversations with other people or
Well, it's interesting because I've only read the play. I have not had the opportunity to see it yet. And I live in Chicago and I don't see any productions here on the horizon just yet. But
though there will be, I think it's been announced. There's one at I believe they've announced it. Timeline Theater is doing it as a sort of a co-pro with Broadway in Chicago. I think that opens in either February or March, something or early in the new year, I
great in the winter when everybody wants to go out
think.
and about in Chicago.
Exactly.
Um, but in reading it, I loved how everybody spoke in these terms of like political correctness and giving space and allowing for other people. But I never got a sense that they hurt each other in any real way, for quite some time. And I'm wondering, you know, is listening something you wanted to explore in the play or the lack of listening?
Yeah, I mean, I think they do. I think early on in the play, I think they are trying to listen to each other, and I think, um, I think the way they have of doing things, of finding consensus, as tedious as it are, like it's worked for them, and it's worked for them for a very long time, up until this moment when they kind of encounter this thing in which you can't really find a consensus about, because it doesn't work that way. I mean, I do think also there's a way in which we were just talking about this last night when I went to see a preview of the production here in Marin, which is kind of a remount of the original Berkeley production. Um, and how even, whenever we did that 8 years ago, um, there's a way in which things that at the time felt very particular to Berkeley, now have kind of are everywhere, and kind of certain ways of talking or engaging or being, which uh, is strange and disorienting.
As Berkeley goes, so goes the rest of the country.
I know, for better or for worse.
Because I've read the play, there's a note that you have early on before we get into the actual play itself, where
Mhm.
it says words in parentheses are not to be spoken, um, which I thought was fascinating because I wondered what the challenge is in getting those unsaid words across to an audience, and what does it say about the characters, perhaps that they infer things rather than say them.
Oh, I mean, I think that's just really sort of those words in parentheses are kind of to be helpful to the actors so that they know, I think, I mean, as I'm doing right now, in sort of natural, speech in the wild, we often um don't complete our sentences or interrupt ourselves mid-thought with a new thought. And so there's a lot of that. And so it's really just for kind of clarity for the actor to know like where they were going with that sentence before they either changed their minds or were interrupted by a new thought and said something different instead, or interrupted by another person. Um, and yeah, it's not. I mean, it's not a unique invention of mine to kind of lay that on the page that way.
No, I know I've seen it before, but different writers have different ideas as to what that purpose is. Um, you have said that you didn't set out to write, you know, a parody or a satire. You wrote to depict people as they were, and somehow
Mhm.
that just turned out to be funny. Um, What life does a play, has this play, Eureka Day, taken on after you get put it into the hands of audiences and critics and actors and directors?
Yeah, I mean, it's very it's so fascinating, and theater is so strange, and to get to see it have so many different iterations, and you try and understand, when it lands differently in a different city, in a different country, how much of that is um, because of that production and either the choices they made or just kind of naturally who the people are, who are actors and what they're bringing to it. How much of it is, you're in a different culture, and so certain things are gonna read differently in London or in Austria than they do in New York or in Berkeley. And then how much of it, especially with this play, is like, what is the moment in time we're in? Because it felt very different in 2018, 2019, and then it felt like something else entirely. The early productions, kind of right after, people were doing plays again after COVID. There was one really pretty early on, I want to say like fall of 2021 in Syracuse. And um, so there was a certain feeling about things at that time because it was so consuming every part of our life. And now that we have a little more distance from, being locked up inside, I think it's something else. So plays are these strange sort of living things that are always going to be a little different, which is both beautiful and totally maddening as a playwright, because you can never really, sort of lock it down. It's always going to change.
But when you say you didn't set out to write a satire and the world perceives it as a satire, you know, what does that say to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think two things. I think one, it's very often the case that if you put certain things on stage, um, exactly as they are in real life, they seem either comedic or more than that, they can seem over the top, even if and almost unrealistic, even if it's something that has really happened. But I I also think that is a way in which, the distance from um Berkeley, from it wasn't that people didn't receive it as having a lot of comedy the first time it was done in Berkeley, but I think um there was no question that, like, these are real people and these are just like us. We know people just like this. It feels very authentic. And then I think that, the farther distance it travels, where maybe people don't know people like that in their life as much. And so then they perceive it as maybe more exaggerated. Like there are a couple different critics in London, even some who quite liked the play, who said something like, "Oh, well, nobody really acts this way in real life," and which I think maybe is just them being a little less familiar with how we are in California than they would like to think they are.
But I would assume that a director's job and a cast job in a play like this is to not play this as humor at all, to play it as naturally as possible.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, when you have, as I've been so lucky to have with so many productions, when you have really good actors, that's sort of naturally where they're going to go anyway. They're going to want to find the sort of authenticity and the truth. Of course, still, like, hitting the jokes when you can. But yeah, but I did feel like it was important to sort of say that in the printed script as it's kind of going out into the world and people. I just think it's so tempting. It can be tempting to just kind of, try and squeeze every laugh you can out of every moment. And I think if you do that, particularly in the sort of first half of the play, then you don't leave yourself anywhere to go in the second half.
Right. It's not Noel Coward. You don't play it broadly from the very beginning.
Right.
Um, but any good comedy exists for more than just laughs. Any good satire, for that matter, exists for more than just laughs. How important is it for you that the audience takes something else away from Eureka Day besides having had a good time or having laughed?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the if people leave the play and continue to think about it, that's a success. I feel like most things we consume, especially as we consume so much every day, like we then immediately forget about. So that I don't have a sort of very specific like because I just don't think this way when I'm writing. Like, oh, I want people to walk out of the theater thinking about X. In part because I think that's sort of a fool's errand because everybody's coming in with such a different background and experience and what they had for lunch that day and how tired they are and just sort of everyone's going to sort of have their own experience. And so if you, I think, A, don't bore them while they're there, and B, they continue to think about it later, then I think that you've done your job.
But there was the initial impetus to not just write, but to write about something, wasn't there?
Sure. I mean, yeah, because it was something I was curious about, and so and thought it would make an interesting thing to explore in a play.
How many of these people are people you know?
I mean, all of them in a sense. Like, there's no one in the play who's like, you directly based on any individual person, but I think to some degree everybody is kind of a composite of various different people I know.
Was Eureka Day being canceled at the Kennedy Center, possibly soon to be named the Trump Center? Um, I said that because I knew it would get a laugh. Um, a curse, a blessing, or both?
I mean, both, I think. On the one hand, was very excited to have the show go to the Kennedy Center and get that production to get to have a little more life. And I'm I grew up in the DC area, so my parents were very excited about, me having a show at the Kennedy Center. Um, but once Trump took over, it was going to be, I think would be very complicated to be there in a way that I think was going to, be in some real kind of morally gray territory, and so in a certain sense, was relieved that it didn't happen. Because I, I think if and I respect, I think people have made different choices, and I sort of respect. I can see all of the arguments, but I think it'd be very hard if you had a show there to be in a position where are you hoping that it will be a success and that lots of people come see it, but then would that success be something they could point to and say, look how well it's going now under the leadership of our great leader? So then would you be wanting it not to be successful? You can't win, I think, at that point.
And as you're describing that, I'm sort of thinking you would find yourself in the same conundrum that the people at this school face in terms of what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong.
Hmm. Yes, no, in a certain sense, yeah. How do you? I mean, yeah, you're well, and similarly, I think to people in school, you're trying to sort of balance different values and figure out, which one should get the greater weight when they come into conflict.
You gotta, you know, you don't want to rest on your laurels, so of course you have another play that had a world premiere this spring in Miami,
Mhm.
Birthright. What did you learn from that production, and what does the future hold from what you know right now for that play?
Um, that I learned a lot. That was a pretty wild process because I had been commissioned with the idea that they were going to produce it the following season. So they had already, announced the play before I started writing it, which was a little crazy making, particularly for the topic, which was a crazy one to take on. But it ended up, somehow kind of coming together in a way that was really special, and I'm really excited about it. And it's not announced, and I think some wrinkles are being ironed out, but it looks like it'll be in New York next year in the sort of late spring, early summer.
You've discussed the challenges of writing and the loneliness of writing and the anxiety of writing in many a conversation. Did having a deadline like that help you in terms of getting over those sort of crises that every writer, I think, faces?
I mean, I think having a deadline is crucial to ever getting anything done. But I do think in a weird way, also because I I really was not, the play was not finished in a certain sense when we started rehearsal. And so that part was great because even though I mean I almost killed myself doing it, but I was, getting up at 3 a.m. every day to kind of rewrite before rehearsal for the first few weeks. And then so having that collaboration of knowing yes, I was bringing the pages in and we were going to adhere them and put them up in their feet, was super useful in being able to get it done, even though it was, I would not exactly want to do that again in that way because it was pretty rough.
I spoke to K. Todd Freeman earlier today because he's directing Rajiv Joseph's play Mr. Wolf at Steppenwolf. And
Hmm.
he's also in a play that's off Broadway. But he had been in two Kushner plays. And he said Kushner is still rewriting Angels in America.
Hmm.
I mean, given what we all think of that play, that, I'm sure you don't want to be in a position of rewriting a play 30 years later, but it's nice to know that, somebody who's achieved everything he has goes through the same anxiety you do.
Yeah, and I don't know that it's possible to be in rehearsal with a play and not rewrite it. Because I mean, not maybe not majorly, but at least tweak it a little bit, both because, you've changed as a person, so now maybe things feel a little different to you. But also if you're working on a production, especially one with a little bit of profile where you feel like it's important to get it right. Um, you at least I find myself always, you're going to make little changes just because you have different actors. And so there are going to be certain lines that just, um, they don't land as naturally sort of coming out of their mouth as they did with maybe the actor that you developed it with. And so you're gonna tweak it so that it feels good, in the body of that person, because you want it to be good. And so I think it's, there's sort of no way to avoid that. And I even now I'm you know uh there are a few, I made a couple very very tiny changes even to Eureka Day, just bouncing back and forth between the rehearsals for the one up here in Marin and the one down there in LA, and nothing significant, but it's you can't not do it, I think.
Does that mean every production might have tiny little tweaks? I mean, not every production.
No, I mean because I don't plan to be around for every production. I mean this, I'm around for this one here because it's here where I live. It's this many of the people that I kind of made the play with the first time, and so I want to be it's just nice to be there. And the one in LA is, it's LA. I want it to be I want it to be successful. And it's fun to be down there, but I think for the most part I am, I will if I can, and if I'm invited, show up on opening night, but I don't plan to be in rehearsal with many other productions.
Right. Well, I did read in Deadline Hollywood that there have been discussions about a feature film adaptation. So of course you would want LA to go well.
Yes, yes. So I am, yeah, beginning work on that. So yeah, we shall see.
Well, good. Well, one last thing that I want to ask you about, Jonathan, is I read that one of the playwrights you admire most is Carol Churchill, a
Hmm.
playwright that I happen to like a lot. And in her adaptation of August Strindberg's A Dream Play, she wrote, "People aren't evil and people aren't good. They live how they can one day at a time. They come out of dust, they go back to dusty, dusty feet, no wings, and whose fault is that?" And when I read that, I thought, God, that kind of reflects the characters in Eureka Day and
Hmm.
perhaps characters in your other plays. And I'm wondering how much you feel that this play and other work is sort of in sync with that line that Carol Churchill wrote.
Yeah, I think that is very much something that resonates with me, and that um, I tend to begin a play with some question or experience, something I sort of don't understand and am curious about, and um, we'll do as appropriate for the topic, a lot of, interviews and research, and um it's sort of the best part is getting to try and understand how other people think, how other people move through the world. And so and when you do that, when you do interviews, no matter sort of how contentious the topic or not contentious, but if you just, I mean, I guess you're a journalist, so you experience this. I'm not a journalist, but it feels revelatory to me. But um, it's so, especially at a time when kind of political debate is so contentious and nobody wants to really hear anybody else. There's something so human about talking to somebody where you're not trying to convince them of anything. You're just trying to listen and understand where they're coming from, and I think that is I don't know a very alive thing then to be able to bring into a play.
I just wish that curiosity dictated more of our conversations and not, entrenched beliefs.
Yeah, I think the curiosity is so key. Like there's so much. I mean, I think, and I don't. I mean, I guess a lot of my work has a kind of political valence, some more intentional than others, but I think we, for good reasons, like have sort of an allergy if we're told to like political theater, or because we have an expectation that means it's going to be didactic and that we're just going to have to be stuck in a theater listening to, characters as mouthpieces for the playwright, being telling us everything they think. And I think so for me, I think if you or at least if I won't speak for other people, but like if begin from a place of like, oh, I want to write this play because I have something important to say, then I feel like, I'm doomed and it's going to be awful for me, for the audience, for everyone. Whereas if I can begin with, oh, I have something I'm trying to understand, then you can lean into you can sort of follow the curiosity, wherever it takes you, and it'll take you to places that maybe you didn't expect to go.
I think that's great. And that led to a place you didn't expect to go, which was on the stage at Radio City Music Hall, didn't it?
It sure did. Yes, I did not. I certainly did not expect that when I started this.